Hello, welcome to Data Meeting 3 with Team 2. This is Bridging the Gap with Julian King, Heidi Glisson, and Paul Bellevue. Our roles for Data Meeting 3. As you see this week, Paul was the leader and the facilitator, Heidi was our researcher, and I was the consolidator. How do we communicate? We communicate through a variety of sources and tools, Google Hangout being definitely one of the most used. Email is probably the second most used. We use our UMUC team discussion forum. We use that on and off because we email each other so much, so we don't really communicate on that as often. Our Google Docs, that's a big way of how we get a lot of our work done. And we can see who was the last person to edit a document, who's the last person to go in and change something. Heidi and Paul are very good with being the first ones to set something up, or I'll set it up if I notice they haven't. And we work very well like that. And weekly check-ins, even when it's not a data meeting week, we check in with each other, make sure school is going well, life is going well, any misconceptions, anything we might need to clear up, we take care of that then. So we kind of keep in touch with each other. We got to keep in check of each other because these are my group members. So our timeline, we go back to Data Meeting 1. In Data Meeting 1, each person brought their own set of data. We examined the data and came up with exploratory questions for each data set. Data Meeting 2, we kind of focused in on one set of data, which was my data. We then completed our artificial tracking sheet and determined whether the artifacts showed instructional or learning gaps to what significance and prominence. And with Data Meeting 3, our most recent data meeting, the group gathered research articles that could lead to implementation tips that could aid in closing the instructional and learning gaps. SMART goals were also created for the instructional and learning gaps, and evaluation metrics were created to assess those goals. So we created our SMART goals, we created ways to evaluate and assess whether the kids met those specific SMART goals. And a lot of the research we got this week was great research because it helped us find a couple more tips we may not have already known, or just things that probably should have been re-emphasized throughout lessons or throughout observations, or just anytime you're with the kids or creating a lesson plan. So let's start with our learning gaps. We went from highest to lowest, which is the most significant, to the least significant. Our most significant starts with our scaffolded seating chart. Seating chart of groups of 4. We have my ESL kids. Those are in one group. I have my Spectrum special needs kids. They're in one group. General ed is in another group. But I group them based on their learning needs and how they interact with each other. We realize that this affects small groups. The implementation tips are factors to consider: class size and shape, distractions, student age, teaching style, objective. So how big your class is, who gets distracted easily, how old are your kids, what style fits you best as a teacher, and the overall objective of the class. Our next learning gap is our third quarter benchmark. That affects large groups. They're saying summative assessment certifies learning. Generally, educators administer a summative assessment near the end of an instructional unit to help them answer the question, what did the students learn? Your summative assessment is your assessment that you usually give at the end of a quarter or the end of a year, and it sums up. Summative sums up everything you've learned for that specific quarter or for that year. Next was our formative assessment. That affects individuals. Formative assessment guides learning. It includes giving clear, actionable feedback to students, sharing learning goals, and modeling what success looks like. Your formative assessments can be given every week, every 2 weeks. Those are the ones that help you keep in touch with your students, let them know what they can fix, and those are the ones that really should really be affecting your instruction. You show what you know, student sample. The purpose of a good exemplar collection is to generate conversation. So that's a great exemplar showing that exemplar shows students this is what I'm looking for. Students need a clear-cut goal to understand what they are trying to attain. As we keep going, our exit ticket, that affects individuals. An implementation tip for that. Interim assessment guides and tracks learning. Opportunities to gather information about many things that are relevant to teaching and the learning process. So we use our exit tickets to kind of understand what each person learned from the lesson. If each person got something right, if each person didn't understand one specific part, those exit tickets kind of help you fill in the gaps. And last thing was our Massachusetts standard breakdown for how they did on the same standards that we're using for our data. Standards ensure better accountability. Standards help guide instructional planning and implementation. Standards provide a model for success. So standards go hand in hand with a goal. Your kids have to have a goal so they know what they're trying to attain. And as we sit here and go through our data meetings, I'm realizing that maybe as we use my data, that my goals may not have been clear cut throughout the year. So going into the next year of teaching, I have to make sure my goals are clear cut so students know specifically what they're trying to learn and what I am looking for. So we go into the instructional gaps. Lesson plan, that affects the whole class. Our implementation for that is ensure alignment, avoid teaching cover to cover, give direction. How to teach, a good lesson plan makes a confident teacher. Planning now saves time later, handing over a good plan. So my lesson plan was not always the best. I may have rushed on the last minute, but preparation makes perfect, and that good tip is pretty much you need to plan your lesson plans out days ahead. Get it done early so you can be prepared for your next class. We have our Math 8 calendar, which was the calendar I had to follow so I kind of can stay on track for which lessons for my students. That affects the large group. Tip for that is to ensure alignment, give direction, and planning now saves time later. You can never be too prepared. Our 8th grade website, that affects large groups. A couple tips from there is 10 reasons every teacher should want a website. I'm not going to read all 10, but a couple. Easy to meet needs of many students, creating an archive, keeps you organized, can save time. Contributions go further than you think. Two-way communication. Number one, a gateway to engagement. Engaging your students is the most important thing in education. So that might be the most useful tool or the most useful tip I've received as we sat there and went through the chart. Next one is our marking period outline. That affects large group. That also goes back to your lesson plan. It goes back to your planning. Everything has to be planned accordingly. The reason why some of their lessons got pushed back was because they didn't completely understand the previous lesson. So I have to plan accordingly and plan for remediation. That way it doesn't affect the overall schedule. Our next one was observation number one. That affects the large group. A useful tip for that is use observation for constructive purposes and critique lessons and improve instruction. So your observation is used to improve your instruction, improve your lessons. It's not to tell you how you were wrong. It's to tell you how to get better. Next one, our Unit 2 instructional focus. That affects our large group. Tips for that is standards ensure better accountability. Standards help guide instructional planning and implementation. So giving your kids a clear-cut goal. Oh, my bad. The last one, standards provide a model for success. Give your kids a clear-cut goal, a clear-cut standard, so they know what they are looking for. So as we get into the second table, our SMART goals. We see that our SMART goals are instruction associated with learning and instructional gap. We chose assessment of prior knowledge, move the stronger special education students to another seating group, Desmos, which is a teacher-created interactive worksheet, and more instruction in classroom time. Our SMART target learning goal for our first column of assessment of prior knowledge. 75% of students to demonstrate 70% proficiency on pre-readiness assessment. Our assessment mechanism for this is the pre-readiness assessment. So, to assess my children or my students' prior knowledge before going into a lesson, they should take the pre-readiness assessment, and 75 or 3/4 of my children need to demonstrate 70% proficiency. Because they have not went over the actual lesson yet, I don't expect them to get over 70% because a lot of it is things that are going to help lead up to it. But those questions that are about the lesson that we're going to eventually get towards, I don't expect them to know that. But the prerequisites and the prior knowledge before that is something that they should know. And that tells me how many of them know it, so I know whether I need to go back or whether I know I can just go ahead with the lesson. Move the stronger special education student to another seating. Our target learning goal was 75% of students to demonstrate 80% proficiency on standard 8EE5. I felt like I had a special education student in my class that because he sat with special ed, he did not have to sit there. He was above average, high level thinker, and he should have been with general ed. He should have been in a general ed group. And I think that might have helped contribute to some of his classmates bringing their scores up because he did very well. Our assessment mechanism for that is a formative assessment. By gauging them every week, every couple weeks, I kind of understand who's learning the best, who's not learning so well, what I need to go back to, who needs more help. Desmos, teacher creative interactive worksheet. Great visual activities, great manipulatives, great for a math class. 75% of students to demonstrate 80% proficiency on standard AEE5. We can assess that by our third quarter benchmark. So that will be my summative assessment after I've already taught the lesson, after they already did as much practice about it, we've built off the lesson, and the lesson should become prior knowledge at that point. That third quarter benchmark tells me how many of the kids retain that information, how many of the kids understand it and can understand it in the long run, how many of them can have it in their memory, they remember it. Bloom's taxonomy says that you have to remember something before you can understand it. So how many of my kids remember it? If they can remember it, they can understand it. More instruction, classroom time. 75% of students that demonstrate 80% proficiency on standard AEE5. Our assessment mechanism will be the PARCC test, which is another summative assessment. And for middle school, especially in PG County, that's what we lead up to is our PARCC test. Our PARCC test is the end of the year summative state assessment. And we don't get those scores back till the next following year. So I won't be able to gauge that till the next year. But more instruction and classroom time, and that's better planning. Planning that if they need remediation, it's in the planning, it's in the calendar, it's in the lesson plan. So I'm not taking out of another lesson's time to go back and forth and to kind of remediate children. Reflections. Great things about my group. We have great attendance. All of my group members are on time for our meetings. Everything goes well in our meetings. Diverse points of view. Because all the teachers have different areas of expertise. Heidi's a Montgomery County teacher. Paul is a charter school teacher, and I'm a Prince George's County teacher. We have different aspects of the same mathematics. Paul doesn't teach what we teach, but at the same time, we have a bunch of different points of views that help towards the overall goal. All math teachers, but teach in different systems with different curriculums. That leads back to what I just said. Because none of us work in PG County, none of us all work in the same county, it gives us a chance to see how this curriculum does it. Heidi did a great job bringing in some sources from Montgomery County and showed us how Montgomery County teaches the same lesson. What's their timetable for the lesson? Our timetable is different in Montgomery County. Paul is in charter school, so they get a little more time. He says he gets to use a little more time for his lessons that he might not have normally got to use. Fixable gaps in learning and instruction. We realize that all the gaps are easily fixable just by working around a couple things. Better planning, different types of instruction, different grouping. These gaps can be fixed by little things during the instruction or during the classroom management. And we're prepped for our next data meeting. We've already started prepping for data meeting number 4. We already have our roles laid out, and we're going to start working on that closer into the week. And that is Bridging the Gap, Team 2, our data meeting 3. Once again, this is from Julian King, Heidi Glisson, and Paul Bellevue.